Hey guys, I'm the Disc Golf Teacher, and with March Madness starting for the NCAA basketball tournaments yesterday, today I thought I'd bring you some March Madness disc golf style, where I take 64 discs and pit them against each other in a big tournament, and we're going to see what's the best disc once and for all. All right. Now, most of my information for this came from OTB's website, where they list out some of the best putters, mid-ranges, and drivers and things like that. And so that's where I got a lot of these different seedings and things as to what was the most sold. Now, obviously, some of their discs are going to be sold more than others, but the point is, you're going to disagree with me at some point today, and because of that, I want to know down in the comments, what did I get wrong? All right, let me know maybe what you would have chosen for some of these different matchups and what the actual winner should have been. All right, so with all that being said, we have 4 regions today. We have the putter region, the mid-range region, the fairway driver region, and the distance driver region. All right, we're going to start up in the putter region, and you can see my 1 versus the 16 seed is the AVR versus the P3X, and the AVR is a very traditional, great disc, so it's going to advance as the 1 seed for a reason. What about the 8 versus the 9 seed? We have the NV versus the Warden. I think with James Conrad's shot a couple years ago, the NV has to advance here to round 2. Let's move down to the Harp versus the Berg, 5 versus 12 seed. The Berg kind of has one job, and that's it. And the Harp is a little bit more versatile. You can throw it on a few more angles, so it will advance. What about Challenger and the Zone? Personally, I've never thrown the Challenger before. Nothing that I can say bad about it, but the Zone is so well liked that it has to advance to the next round. Wizard versus the PA3, the 3 versus the 14 seed. I have never thrown the PA3. Prodigy's kind of getting a bad rap right now with what they're doing with Gannon, so I think the Wizard has to advance there. The Nova versus the P2, 11 versus the 6 seed. The Nova is an interesting disc. I had a couple for a while, but I don't know, they're a little finicky to me, and of course the P2 is such a well-liked disc. It's the last few years, I think it's been the best-selling putter, if I'm not mistaken, and so it's going to advance to the next round, the P2. Luna versus the Ion. The Ion's actually my personal putting putter, which if you have seen any of my in the bags, you've seen that. However, the Luna's kind of coming on strong here in the last few years with Paul Macbeth has moved to Discraft, and so it's going to advance to the next round. All right, and then our 2 seed is the Judge versus the 15 seed Roach. Again, the 2 seed Judge, very popular putter with especially DD players, and so it's going to advance to round 2. All right, back to the top now. Here we have the AVR versus the NV, the 1 versus the 8 seed in round 2. The NV, believe it or not, is going to overtake the AVR. We got a little upset alert here. And so because of, again, James Conrad's shot and the AVR, in my opinion, I think it's kind of fading out a little bit. So I don't know. Innova players, they still seem to putt with it quite a bit, but the NV is such a good throwing putter, it's going to advance to round 3. All right, the Harp versus the Zone, 2 very, very similar discs. Again, I think we just have to go with popularity here. The Zone is a little bit more liked, and so it's going to advance to the next round. Okay, the 3 versus the 6 seed now. We got Wizard versus the P2. Again, P2, because of all of its sales, I think it has to advance to the next round. Luna versus Judge. We got another upset alert on this one. The Luna, again, is coming on real strong the last few years. It has to advance, I think, in my mind. And so the Luna will make it out to the Sweet 16. Okay, 4 putters left here in our putter region. We have the NV, Zone, P2, and the Luna. All right, starting off with the NV versus the Zone. Again, the Zone is going to actually overtake the NV and move on to the next round. It just seems to be such a good approach disc. I think it has to advance. All right, then the 6 versus the 7 seed. 2 kind of lower seeds that made it all the way so far. And I think the P2, this was really close. The Luna is a great disc, but the P2, you can putt with it, you can approach with it, and I suppose you can too with the Luna, but the P2 is just such a staple for the last several years, whereas the Luna is kind of just coming on the scene the last few. All right, so that leaves us then with 2 discs left here in our putter region, the Zone versus the P2. Pretty tough one to pick, but because, again, you can putt and throw with the P2, whereas you probably don't want to actually use the Zone as your putting putter, I think because of that reason, the P2 has to advance to the Final 4. All right, again, let me know, what did I do wrong here in this putter region? Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, we're going to move on to Midranges. All right, moving over to our mid-range region. Starting off here with our 1 seed, we got the Rock 3 versus the 16 seed of the MD1, the brand new Mindbender. All right, this one was not even close. The Rock 3 is such a tried and true disc. The MD1 is just kind of making its debut in the last year or so, so the Rock 3 is going to advance. What about number 8 versus number 9? Is it Cakes or K's? I don't know. You guys let me know in the comments, but that versus the Warship. I haven't really thrown either of these, but I've heard really, really good things about the Cakes, and so it's going to advance. The Hex versus the Meteor. Interesting one here, as the Hex has kind of got some new life with Simon moving to MVP, and so it's going to advance over the Meteor. Pathfinder versus the MD3. MD3 is a fantastic disc. The Pathfinder, it's okay, but the MD3 is one of my staples in my bag personally, so it will advance to round 2. All right, the Truth versus the Anvil. Anvil, very overstable. The Truth, again, very true to whatever flight you put it on, so because of its versatility, it has to advance to round 2. The Mango versus the Pig. Again, 2 overstable discs here. The Pig, though, with Ricky making that pretty popular about 4 years ago, it has to advance. And 7 versus the 10 seed, the Mako versus the Justice. Or Mako 3 versus the Justice, I should say. And here, this was a tough one. I have had some bad experiences with my Mako 3s. So because of that, I think the Justice and its predictability is going to move on to round 2. A little bit of an upset on that one. All right, the Comet versus the Buzz. This one was no contest at all. The Buzz clearly ran away with that one. All right, so that moves us into the round of 32. Back up to the top, we have the Rock 3 versus the Cakes, and the Rock 3 is the winner on that one. The 1 seed kind of carried it through to the next round there. The Hex versus the MD3. Again, a 4 versus 5 seed, very close matchup. However, the MD3 is going to move on. I think if Simon wouldn't have made the Hex as popular, it would have maybe fizzled out even in round 1. So we'll kind of see how that plays out as he continues with MVP. But MD3 is moving on in this one. Truth versus the Pig. Again, this was pretty close in my opinion. But because the Truth, again, has a little bit more versatility, you can throw it on sort of any angle and it holds it true to its line. That's why it has its name. It's going to advance to the next round. The Justice versus the Buzz. Justice, pretty stable, but the Buzz, again, with its versatility, will move on. Buzz is a great disc. All right, so in the round of, what is this, the Sweet 16, I think, we have the Rock 3, the MD3, the Truth, and the Buzz that's left. And in that first matchup there at the top, we got the Rock 3 versus the MD3. This is an upset for me. I don't think the Rock 3 is going to make it out. The MD3 is much better, in my opinion. Has a great flight to it. I can get it a little bit further than I can with the Rock 3. Rock 3 is just a little bit more stable, and because of that reason, I like to throw the MD3 on more of those straight shots, and it advances to the next round. All right, the Truth versus the Buzz. Very similar discs here. The Buzz, though, a little bit more predictable with its finish. So because of that, it's going to advance. And now we have our final matchup of our mid-range region, the MD3 versus the Buzz. Very, very similar discs, but because of its popularity and how great of a disc that it is, the Buzz is going to advance to the Final Four. All right, let's move on to the Fairway Driver region. All right, 2 regions down. Now we're over at the Fairway Drivers. You can see that our top seed is the Firebird versus the 16 seed Scepter. I've never thrown the Scepter before, and everyone seems to have a Sexton Firebird or even a regular Champion Firebird. And its consistency, it's going to move it on to the next round. Not even close there. The 8 versus the 9 seed, the River versus the Escape. Again, pretty close, 8 versus 9. You can't get much closer than that. And so because of that, it's kind of a toss-up for me. They both could have a case to making it on, but I think the Escape is going to make it here to the next round. FD versus Athena. We got the tried and true FD versus the brand new Athena by Paul Macbeth. And because of that reason, the FD, I think, is going to make it on to the next round. Such a good disc. And hopefully that new FD1's even better when they come out with that. All right, the Eagle versus the Onyx. Eagle, seems like you're either a T-Bird or an Eagle fan back in the day. And because of that, I think the Onyx is going to just move on. It has a little bit more popularity with the Discraft folks. Okay. Speaking of T-Bird, that's our 3 seed versus the Crave 14 seed. The Crave, kind of an interesting disc. It's finding its way into my bag about every other round or so. However, the T-Bird is such a staple with Innova that it has to move on to the next round. Right, the Fireball versus the Felon. 2 very, very similar discs here with MVP and dynamic discs. And it's just kind of a toss-up, but I think dynamic discs is a little bit more popular, has more of a following than MVP, and because of that, the Felon is going to move on to the next round. All right, the Thunderbird versus the Tesla. Tesla is kind of a hybrid disc. I threw it in the Fairway Drivers. However, the Thunderbird, Big Germ kind of made that one popular. It's kind of a little brother to the Destroyer, which is a great disc, and so the Thunderbird is going to move on to the next round here. All right, Passion versus the Captain's Raptor. I think Passion is the disc that Paige Pierce helped come up with, and the Captain's Raptor, another Discraft disc, is Yuli's doing, and the Captain's Raptor is such an interesting, overstable disc. It's going to move on as it's our 2 seed here in the Fairway Driver region. All right, that does it for the first round. Let's move on to round 2. We got the Firebird versus the Escape up there with our 1 versus the 9 seed. And the Firebird is going to advance as it's, again, a very, very predictable disc, and I think most people probably own a Firebird. The FD versus the Onyx. The 5 versus the 4 seed, again, is always very tricky to pick a winner here. However, I think the FD has been around a little bit longer. It's a great straight flyer for me, at least, and it's going to beat out the Onyx in this round. The T-Bird versus the Felon. Same thing here. The T-Bird, it's kind of like the FD from the round before. It's going to move on to the next round as it's such a well-known disc. Thunderbird versus the Captain's Raptor. In this case, though, the Captain's Raptor, it's got quite the popularity. It is going to beat out the Thunderbird as it has that predictability at the end of its flight that we all like. Okay, so that leaves us with the Firebird, the FD, the T-Bird, and the Captain's Raptor in the Sweet 16. Let's see what happens. The Firebird versus the FD. This is a no-brainer for me. The Firebird is the clear winner. It's such a great disc. It's going to move on. The T-Bird versus the Captain's Raptor. This was a tough one because I like both of these discs. However, the T-Bird and the T-Bird and the Firebird, I think, have to advance here to the Elite 8 as they're kind of what Innova built their company on. Those and the AVR as well as the Destroyer. So the Firebird versus the T-Bird is what we have. It is going to be an Innova winner here in our Fairway Driver section, and because of that, I think I have to go with the Firebird. Again, if I'm going to pick one disc to have in my bag, it's going to be the Firebird out of the Firebird or the T-Bird. All right, so that does it for our Fairway Driver round. Let's move on to the big boys, the Distance Drivers. All right, our last region is the Distance Drivers. These are the big boys. Let's see how it plays out here. We got our number 1 seed Destroyer versus the Spice. Never thrown the Spice before, but I do have about 21 Destroyers in my collection, and so of course that has to move on to the next round. The Hades versus the PD. Again, I'm a PD fan myself, and so it's going to beat out the Hades in this case, but I know there's a lot of Hades lovers out there, so let me know in the comments down below how wrong I am for this pick. The Raider versus the PD2. Same reason here. This is going to be a big upset in the brackets. The 12 seed is going to beat the 5 seed. The PD2 is moving on. The PD2 is my personal sidearm disc of choice, as that's what I use for almost everything forehand. The Zeus versus the Wraith. Here, the 13 seed Zeus versus the number 4 Wraith. Innova just owns, it seems, the Distance Drivers. So because of that reason, the Wraith has to move on to our next round. All right, DD3 versus the Trace. Here we got another upset. The DD3, I'm not a big fan of it. I have thrown it pretty far with some tailwind before. I think I got over 500 feet once. But the Trace seems to be a great sort of lower speed distance driver. And I know I have a few friends that really like it. So it's going to move on with the big upset here, 14 versus the 3 seed. Right, Force versus the Defender. Again, another upset. Seems like the distance drivers are full of upsets here. The Force is going to move on to the next round. A lot of players moving to Discraft, it seems, lately. A lot of big names last few years, and they've really made the Force popular once again. Okay, what about the 7 versus the 10 seed? We got the Wave versus the Shrike. The Wave is just a little bit too finicky for me. The Shrike can also be a little bit finicky, but it seems to have a little bit more predictable finish to it. I have it in the Halo plastic, so maybe that's why. But the Shrike is going to move on for me in this matchup. And then that moves us to our 2 seed versus the 15 seed. We got the Nuke versus the Construct. I've heard really good things about the Construct. However, the Nuke, can't really go wrong with the Nuke, so the Nuke is going to move on to round 2. All right, that moves us back to the top here. We got the Destroyer versus the PD, the 1 versus the 8 seed. Again, I have over 20 Destroyers in my collection, and because of that, it's what I'm throwing off the tee most of the time. The Destroyer is going to move on. The PD2 versus the Wraith. Again, guys, the Wraith, it's a great disc. It's going to move on. So we'll have an interesting matchup with the Wraith versus the Destroyer here in the next round. We'll see what happens. But until then, let's move down to the Trace versus the Force. We got an 11 versus a 14 seed. This isn't a matchup you see too often. However, the Force is going to take the win on this one as the Trace. I just don't know too much about it. The Force has that predictability at the end that it is going to move on. All right, the Shrike versus the Nuke. These are 2 very fast discs. I think they're both 13 speeds, if I'm not mistaken. And the Nuke is going to move on in this round as it's more of a true flyer. You can get a predictable flight out of it. The Shrike, sometimes with some headwinds and things, it seems to flip over on me a little bit too much. Okay, so in the Sweet 16, we got the Destroyer, the Wraith, the Force, and the Nuke. Let's move up to that Destroyer-Wraith matchup. This could have easily been on either side of the bracket, and they might have made it all the way to the end. However, they're going to meet up here in the Sweet 16. And again, the Destroyer, I have a little bit bigger hands. It's going to win on this one, but I can clearly see if you wanted the Wraith, why you would want that. Those are 2 very similar discs. They're just separated by 1 speed, 11 versus 12. All the other flight numbers are the exact same. The Force versus the Nuke. Here we have a couple of Discraft matchups on the other side of the bracket, and the Nuke is going to move on in this case, as I think Paul Ulibarri has made it a little bit popular the last couple years, and it's even turned into a bit of a meme. But that brings us to the Elite 8. We got the Destroyer versus the Nuke, and the 1 versus the 2 seed. The Destroyer is going to move on here. Again, it's my personal favorite, and so it has to move on to the Final 4, in my opinion. Speaking of the Final 4, let's take a look at what that looks like in our bracket. All right, this is it. You made it. This is our Final 4 of our Disc Golf March Madness brackets. 4 discs that we have here are the Destroyer, the P2, the Firebird, and the Buzz. All right, starting off with our top matchup here, we have the Destroyer versus the P2. You don't normally pit a Destroyer, or a distance driver, I should say, against a putter. However, this is March Madness. It's going to get crazy. So, the Destroyer versus the P2. The Destroyer is going to come out on top. You can make a case probably for either one. The P2 is a great putter, but the Destroyer, you can get so much distance off the tee. It just has to be moving on to the next round. Right, that leaves us with the Firebird versus the Buzz. This was a really tough one for me to decide. I love both these discs. The Firebird is a great sidearm disc. You can trust it into that headwind, as it's very predictable. The Buzz, also a very versatile disc. It can be thrown on, hyzer and hyzer, and it holds that angle the entire way. It's not a hyzer flip disc, so it's going to go on whichever angle you put it on. It's going to stay there. So for that reason, I think the Buzz has to move on to the next round, as it's such a great 1 disc round disc. Okay, so that moves us to our finals. We have the Destroyer versus the Buzz. Now, you can make a case for either one here, the Destroyer or the Buzz. The Destroyer you can throw nice and far. It goes off the tee. You can beat them in. The Star Destroyer is one of the best discs ever. And then same reason for the Buzz. It's probably one of the best mid-ranges ever, as it's a great beginner disc. The pros throw it, and anyone in between. And for both those reasons, for the Destroyer and the Buzz, I think I have to go with the Destroyer on this one. and it's going to be our champion of our March Madness disc golf brackets. All right, guys, again, you probably disagree with me somewhere along the line as to some of these different matchups, so let me know down in the comments below, and I'll be sure to check those out and maybe even respond to you. Otherwise, we got a video up here on the screen that you might like, and until next time, we'll see you out there.